So here's the question. Do you run the day? Or does the day run you? Or rather, is it the habits that run your day? On the Level Up edition of the Mind Game podcast, yes, that's what we're calling the solo episodes where we dig into topics of the mind, we wonder, how many things do you do in a day that you don't even realize that you are doing? How many of those actions shape your day without you even thinking about it? Researchers suggest that 40 to 50% of your day is run by your very own self-made habits. But here's the thing. When's the last time you actually did a habit check? When's the last time you paused and wondered if the habits you have are actually moving you closer to your goal? And that's where we begin our descent into the mind game, as we explore the behind-the-scenes connections of habits and the way your environment shapes what you do. In this episode, we delve into what's in a habit, along with the myths of mediocrity and multitasking. We consider the connection between perspective and mindset, and we wonder if the age-old saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is just something that we tell ourselves when we don't actually want to step out of our comfort zone. And it wouldn't be the Level Up edition if we didn't include a Jedi mind trick that can help you flip your perspective. So if you're curious about the ways habits subtly shape your soul, join us for part 1 as we pull back the curtain on the ways habits shape your life. P.S. You have about 60 seconds to think of a habit and get ready for the episode. Here comes the intro. Welcome to Mind Game, a podcast to level up your life. My name is Stephanie Pipke-Painchaud, and I'm excited for you to join me on a journey behind the scenes where we'll dig into the stories of resilience, mindset, and unlock the simple habits that will help you change the game. Before we dive in, I want to express our gratitude for your continued support. Your energy powers our quest to provide content that encourages you to unlock new levels of personal growth and step out of your own comfort zone. If you're inspired by an idea or have a suggestion for a future topic, connect with us at mindgamelevelupyourlife.com. Your feedback is a power-up that helps us continue on this epic adventure. So if you're ready to get out of your own way and explore what you didn't know you needed to know, you've come to the right place. So buckle up, open up your mind. It's time to level up. And welcome to the Level Up, a special episode of the Mind Game Level Up Your Life podcast. It is a solo episode with me, Stephanie Pipke-Painchaud. I am your host of the Mind Game podcast, and I hope that you've enjoyed all of our amazing guests so far in the first 10 episodes. You first met me on This Is 47. So what we're going to talk about today is what is the solo episode of the Mind Game podcast. Still working on the Dig In edition of the Mind Game podcast with my daughter. But this one, when we talk about the level up, this is a topic that I'm interested in, something that connects to the Mind Game podcast. Here we're focused on mindset. How does mindset impact our life? How do all of those pieces come together and influence what we do every day? Because we know the small things that we do every day add up to big changes over the long period of time. So drop a comment down below or reply to this and let me know what you thought of the Mind Game podcast so far, and welcome to the Level Up edition. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is habits. I posted this on social media the other day and had many comments and suggestions from all of you, so stay tuned for a shout out to some of those comments that we saw on social media. And if you are someone who loves to talk about habits, reach out to me at stephanie@mindgamelevelupyourlife.com and let me know if you would be interested in being on the podcast. So let's start with a few things to think about when we level up and move forward. The goal is by the end of the Level Up episode that you have actionable strategies or suggestions that you can put into practice. So I am interested to hear how it goes. And so what is it that truly drives change? What is it that actually causes us to make a change and do something to move forward in our life? I think you've heard me say several times I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so it's not the continual pursuit of perfection. It is the continual pursuit of progress that we are interested in. So not perfection, we are focused on progress, but what is it that actually keeps us moving forward and making that progress? Is it those giant, big, scary, audacious goals that we set for ourselves, or is it the small, quiet things that we do every day and the environment and how we set it up around us? Is it the people that are close to us? What continues to drive us forward? Oftentimes we set a giant goal, but we don't always make it. We don't always get there. We learn a lot. We potentially can learn a lot along the way, but sometimes those big, scary goals aren't what actually drive the change. Let's explore the concept of habits. So people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures, by F.M. Alexander. So let's think about that. What's in a habit? Why is it that a habit shapes our life? And how does becoming aware of our habits help us to move forward in the persistent pursuit of progress, not perfection? What is it that makes habits the things that actually cause the change in our lives? And do you actually decide what your habits are, or do you just keep doing the same things that you're doing every day? I know one person on social media mentioned we create routines, and definitely routines and habits are interconnected with that. So that's something that we can explore in a future episode. In this next, however many minutes this turns into, I'm not sure how long this episode will be, but let's pause and think about the habits. So by the end of this episode, I'd like you to think about what are some of the habits that you have in your life that are either moving you in a positive or in a negative way, or not helping you make progress towards your goal. Let's become conscious of those small things that shape our lives, and let's dig into what's in a habit. Before we go too much further, I do have one other quotation because there are a few other words that come to mind as you're thinking about what are some of the habits that you have in your morning routine, or what are some of the habits that you have during the day, or a habit that you have in place that's connected to another habit or that triggers a different action. I want you to start thinking about some of those habits. But there are a variety of other words that are connected to those. And so when I think of habits, I think of consistency, and I think of the motivation to do that, and the discipline to keep going, and the momentum that it takes to do that, the initial energy that it takes to get started on a habit. And what happens if you need to start a new habit and get rid of an old habit? So this quote, and I have seen it on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook from a variety of people. I've heard Chris Williamson say it. It's in some of the social media videos that I have done, but it really did make me stop and think. So one of the other things that we are going to think about today in relation to habits is this quotation, and that is, discipline eats motivation for breakfast. Discipline eats motivation for breakfast. So what is it that you actually need to start a habit? Let's dig into that conversation and look at what is a habit and why does it matter, and why are the habits the things that shape your lives? And are you actually aware of how those habits are shaping your life? So when you hear me talk about different things that I've learned over the course of this podcast and future podcasts, know that I reference a whole variety of different sources. In the This Is 47 episode, I referenced a number of my favorite authors. Habits, a lot of the information that I have for you here comes from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, the work of Simon Breakspear. So if you're in education, Simon Breakspear will mean something to you. I'm also just starting a book called Limitless by Jim Quick, which has some very interesting information on habits. One of my favorite all-time books is Super Better by Dr. Jane McGonigal. And she has a PhD in game design, and she looks at how we can build resilience, but it's those small things that we do every day. When I talk about habits, there is a large variety of sources. There are many different ways to think about it. This is one perspective for us to consider as we move forward, and I welcome your suggestions and your ideas and your strategies that are helping you move forward and make more progress. So let's dig into the conversation here. And again, if you haven't already paused, think about what are the habits that you have first thing in the morning. When you wake up, what are some of the first things that you do? You get out of bed, you go to the bathroom, do you have a shower, do you get ready for work, do you have some breakfast? and then do you look at your phone? Or does your phone exist beside your bed and the first thing that you do is pick up your phone? Because there is some very interesting research on, and this is coming from Jim Quick's book that I'm currently reading, very interesting research about what happens when you pick up your phone first thing in the morning, as opposed to creating a positive habit to start your day. Not that your phone can't be a positive habit, but that does impact us in different ways. Let's start thinking about those habits. Let's get ready for the mind game, because this is the level up. So let's look at what is a habit. And I have a couple definitions for you. And yes, I went to Google for these. I also use ChatGPT because ChatGPT, which is a form of artificial intelligence, is a very quick way to compile information. So if you haven't tried ChatGPT, you can create an account, you can log in, you can ask it all sorts of questions. You can ask it to act as Dr. Joe Dispenza, to act as Jim Quick or Jane McGonigal and answer questions in different frames. And it will pull from all of the information that is available online except for the last couple of years, and it'll pull that together. So that's a very interesting place to start. I also have one of my favorite motivational apps, and it has AI built into it. And I can say, I want a pep talk to get my fitness routine started for the day. So I want Dwayne The Rock Johnson to give me that pep talk. And it will do that in the style. And it doesn't have his voice, but it does have it written in the style. So if you know who he is and you know what his voice sounds like, you can hear it in your head. So maybe artificial intelligence is another possible podcast conversation that we can have in the future. Let's go back to what is a habit? And then we'll look at what's in a habit, and we'll look at how that impacts your life. This is from Britannica, which always makes me think of the encyclopedias. And if you remember that, you'll remember when you were in school going to the library and racing for those encyclopedias, because that was where, pre-internet, we found all of the information. So now you know which generation I'm part of. Drop a comment down below. Let me know in a response to this podcast episode if you can relate to that. Britannica defines it as a usual way of being, something that a person does often and in a regular, repeated way. So, a usual way of being. Usual, something that we usually do. We probably don't have to think about it very much. It's more of an automatic process for us. And it's something that we do often and in a regular, repeated way. So, that's one version of defining a habit. This one comes from the Cambridge Dictionary, and it refers to a habit as something that you do often and regularly, sometimes without knowing that you are doing it. And so the first time I read that, I thought, something that you do often and regularly, that sounds a lot like the first definition. What caught my attention was sometimes without knowing that you're even doing it. So those habits can become so ingrained in your brain and so hardwired into your brain that once you start down that path, the habit just takes over. You don't even think about it anymore. So part of our goal on the Mind Game podcast is to become more aware of what's happening in the mind game that's up here so that we can level up our life. Let's think about a habit that you could possibly start to flip using some of these techniques as we move forward. Let's take a look at what ChatGPT says is included in a habit. Habits are automatic. They are subconscious behaviors or routines that are performed regularly and often involuntary. So we see a key theme here: regular, repeated actions that we often don't have to think about. They are formed through repetition and the reinforcement of that over time. You do a habit to get something out of it. There's a reason that you did it in the first place, but perhaps that reason has disappeared, but you've continued to keep that habit. So it becomes ingrained into our daily lives. It says, unlike discipline, habits require less conscious effort and willpower, and once established, they operate on autopilot. So there's a first distinction between discipline and a habit. A habit is automatic. It doesn't require as much effort. It doesn't require as much willpower to do because that connection in your brain is already pre-wired. In education, we think about if there are processes that we can automate or we can train our brain to do certain things or respond in certain ways, we can use that as a power to be able to dig into things, think more creatively, think more critically, and not have to hold so much of that process-related information in our brain. So when we automate it, we can clear out some of the information in our prefrontal cortex and start to think more deeply about the information or the conversation that we're having in the now rather than trying to process what's the next thing that we need to do. So, if we can move from awareness through that awkward stage into adoption, we can create that habit. Now, a little bit of a note from Jim Quick's Limitless book on multitasking. Multitasking, what we've discovered, doesn't exist. So we think we have the ability to do multiple things at the same time when in fact, we are constantly task switching. Jim Quick said, when you are task switching, it actually costs more oxygenated glucose, which is what your brain works off of. So that's one of the nutrients that it burns as energy. It burns it as a fuel source. And the more you task switch, the more you switch between A to B to C back to A, all of that has a cost. And that cost is the energy in your brain. And when you use up the energy that you have, then it becomes much harder for you to focus and be productive in what you're doing. One of the things that causes us to think that we're multitasking or causes task switching is your phone. So even that the fact that the phone is near you, if you see it light up, you hear it, it's just sitting there, it will actually distract your brain and it takes you longer to refocus. One of the things you could do is when you need to focus on something, you need to put your phone away. Easier said than done sometimes. So, we've talked a little bit about multitasking and task switching as a quick aside. That's probably a whole other podcast episodes. I want to acknowledge upfront that habits can be both positive and negative. You could have a fantastic habit of exercising daily. I am on day 531 right now in the goal of doing at least 10 minutes of physical activity per day. Some days I'm able to do a full Carolyn Gervin workout. They are some of my absolute favorite workouts. That is a positive habit. I have worked hard to create that exercise and fitness part of my life, and my 10 minutes is my minimum. We'll talk about David Goggins and his book, Never Finished. And one of the things that he talks about is the myth of mediocrity. And if you can convince yourself that I will do 5 minutes, I will do 10 minutes, you can probably do more than that. And when you get down to the basement to do the exercise, you go outside for your walk, you pause to meditate for a moment, you pause to reflect on the day that you've had. If you can build in that myth that I just need 5 minutes, I'm just going to do 10 minutes, you will likely be able to do more than that. I do acknowledge upfront that if you are a busy parent, that may not exist in your world right now. So you'll have to carve out those few minutes into the day in some way, shape, or form. And we'll talk about creating those habits. The book by David Goggins, Never Finished, one of my all time favorite books. So probably a future Level Up episode will be based on some of the books that I'm reading. Here's a little bit of inside information for you. When we're thinking about habits, remember we said that they are shaped not only by the people around you, but also the environment. And so, how you set up your environment can set you up for success, or it can set you up for going down a path that perhaps is not a healthy habit. So, if when you get home from work, you want to have a healthy snack, it's best to have those healthy snacks in a ready to eat, easy to access form. So that makes it easier in your environment for that to happen. You might actually eliminate the unhealthy snacks from your environment so that you don't have easy access to them, and it pushes you towards continuing with that healthy habit. So we become a product of our experience, and our experiences are shaped by our habits and by the people that are around us. And so the people around us matter. And we'll talk about some of the quotations and the research behind you are the sum of the five people that you spend the most time with. And how can you shift that if you can't actually switch up the people that are close to you? But we will talk about that a little bit later. But the environment piece, you can set your environment up for success. Just like I mentioned with the snacks a moment ago, Malcolm Gladwell, also one of my favorite authors, talks about the broken windows effect. And the broken windows effect was in New York City. And he said, you would have highly educated people. You would have people that would never litter. You would have people that would not throw garbage onto the ground. They wouldn't behave like that. He said, but when people crossed from a nice neighborhood into a neighborhood that had broken windows and boarded up doors and there was garbage on the street and perhaps they had something they needed to throw away and there were no garbage cans around, they were more likely, because of that environmental context, to throw the garbage on the ground and not think anything of it. because we are shaped by the environment that we are in. And again, that's the broken windows effect. Malcolm Gladwell talked about that in The Tipping Point, one of my all-time favorite books. So we are shaped by the environment and the people that we encounter and our mindset of what we choose to do to step forward. One of the things to keep in mind when we talk about habits, we talk about shifting our mindset, is our perspective. And our perspective shapes our perception. So our perspective shapes how we see the world. So it is a word that I'd like to talk about for a moment. Our perspective is how we see the world around us, and that is shaped by our beliefs, by our experiences, by our values, and our cultural background. So again, all of those experiences and all of that is coded into our brain, and that shapes how, when we look out at the world around us, we begin to see and view things. It also takes a mindset to be able to consider things from different perspectives, from another person's perspective, to look at things from different angles, to consider different possibilities. Perspective influences our actions and our behaviors, often without us even thinking about it, because that's just how we see the world. Perspective is like putting on a pair of glasses because that impacts how I can see the world. But essentially, perspective is the lens that we view that outer world. Now, the good news is that perspective can grow and change over time, it can evolve. We're not stuck in one perspective. Let's take a look at and just touch on very briefly neuroplasticity. So that's a fancy way of saying that you can actually teach an old dog new tricks. Research into the brain, the science of the brain, talks about the brain's ability to rewire and make new connections. The more that we grow, the more that we interact people, the more that you read, the more things that you learn, all of those things create new connections in your brain. The more often that you create that similar connection, the greater or better connection that you have in your brain. So it will become a better pathway. The brain has the ability to change and rewire itself. It is no longer stuck in a fixed state like we one time imagined. I think it was Jim Quick on my way home from work today in his book Limitless that said, we know that we were no longer correct in assuming that at the end of our late teens and early 20s that the brain stopped, that we just didn't learn anymore. We know that we have the ability to create new neural connections all of the time. And actually, when you engage in conversation with people where people make you think, where they get you reflecting on different perspectives, on questioning your habits and seeing things from different angles, all of that is constantly rewiring your brain. So the more conversation that you engage in with different people who have different perspectives, the more books you read, the different videos that you listen to, what you're learning, all of that increases the neuroplasticity of your brain. Dr. Joe Dispenza says it just like this: neurons that fire together wire together. So once you start creating that pathway, the more often you go down that pathway, the stronger that connection. So neurons that fire together, wire together, that is a behind the scenes part of how you create habits that will help you make progress. And so let's continue on to our next topic here. We've talked about neuroplasticity. We've talked about what a habit is. We've talked a little bit about perspective. But let's also pause for a moment and talk about mindset. So, mindset is the collection of beliefs, attitudes, and assumptions that shape how we perceive ourselves, our abilities, and the world around us. So, mindset is a little bit more about how we see our internal self, and the perspective is more of how we see the world. They are interconnected. There are two types of mindset, and you've probably heard this before, and we will have future conversations on the Mind Game podcast, because the level up begins with having a growth mindset. And a growth mindset means that you are open to change. You can see different perspectives. You can continue to grow and learn. A fixed mindset is you are very stuck. I can't do this. I don't know how to do math. I'm not a science person. Oh, I'm not a reader. Those are all fixed mindset beliefs. Maybe I can't do that math problem yet. Maybe I just haven't learned. If you remember Jason Brooks, he said, if somebody else can do that, why can't I? I haven't learned that yet. So looking for the opportunities, looking for the options to learn and grow, that will help to continue to build more neural connections. That will help us to create better habits to help us make progress. I know mindset versus perspective was one of the things that people have said, what is the difference between that? So, mindset focuses more on the internal beliefs, like I mentioned, the internal attitudes, while perspective encompasses a broader way of seeing things and understanding the world influenced by various factors. The biggest difference between mindset and perspective is mindset is the way that we view our internal self, and that can definitely be influenced by the experiences, the people, the environment that we are in. Mindset is an internal look at that. It does definitely shape how we see the world, but perspective is how our mindset manifests in the world around us. It often looks at interpreting and evaluating situations based on how we see the world. It's influenced by our beliefs and cultural backgrounds, which does play a role in mindset, but there's a slightly different shift. So, mind game is looking inside to see how we're seeing the world on the outside. This one comes from Jim Quick, and I have seen it on social media before, and it is a very powerful way to help shift into a growth mindset and flip your perspective. So here is level up number one of this podcast. Level up number one is shifting your perspective. This is super easy. Instead of saying, I have to, or I've got to, I have to go to work, I have to pick up the kids, the very simple Jedi mind trick to perspective is to flip I have to I get to. So it sounds really simple, but let's play it through. I have to go to work versus I get to go to work. I get to go to work to a job that I have the option to have. I get to work with amazing people. I get to problem solve instead of I have to go to work. I have to see these people. I have to solve these problems. If I get to do that, it shifts the perspective. It shifts into a growth mindset. I get to pick up the kids. I don't have to pick up the kids. I'm fortunate to have kids in my life to be able to pick up. I'm fortunate to be able to go to the grocery store. So that is your level up number one. Flip it from I have to I get to. So don't hesitate to reach out and let me know what you think of level up number one. You can go to www.mindgamelevelupyourlife.com. We've talked about a variety of different terms: habit, mindset, perspective. We'll talk about discipline and consistency and motivation and momentum, all of those pieces that can work together to build habits. None of what we're talking about is easy. I certainly don't have it all together. I want to be very upfront that my life is a work in progress, and I want to invite you along on the journey to learn more information. I love to learn, so always looking to build new neural connections. And I love to try to put into action what I read about. I like to share that with people. And so that, I hope, is my gift to you, is sharing some of this information with you. This was an interesting bit of research that I came across. It said researchers estimate that 40 to 50% of our actions on any given day are done out of habit. And so it says this is already a substantial percentage, but the true influence of your habits is even greater than these numbers suggest. So 40 to 50% of our actions on any given day are shaped by our habits. And they're saying that that's a low number. So you create a program that you don't even think about that governs your life. And I think that's the true mind game. If you can interrupt those habits that aren't serving you, if you can interrupt those routines that aren't helping you to make progress and shift those, you can create phenomenal change in your life. Is that easy? No. You have to become aware of it. You have to be committed to doing that. Do you have to start with huge goals to change the world? No. The best way to change the world is to work on yourself, and that will bring about the change that you want to see in the world. I'm not sure who said that, but I listened to it on one of my audiobooks on the way home the other day. You are the change. You are who the world has been waiting for. So think really small. Think like James Clear, the atomic habits. What are the very tiny pieces that you could look at changing? Shift one thing. A 1% change compounded over days, over weeks, over years makes a huge difference. I believe in episode 1, I talked about going to the gym. If you decide you're going to work out and you do that the first day, you're not going to come out of that workout and say, wow, look at the weight that I lost. Look at the muscle that I gained. Look at how amazing I feel. was probably really hard to get there. It probably took a lot of effort. You're not going to see the results that you want in day 1. You may not see them in day 2. You may not actually see them for weeks, but that consistent change, that consistent commitment to move forward, to shift towards those healthy habits will add up and compound over time. And that will make the difference. Over time, you will see the shift in how your body looks. You will feel different. And because you feel different, that will change how you interact with the people around you, which shifts the energy that you bring into the world. So, if 40 to 50% of our day is done unconsciously, without us even thinking about it, imagine the difference that you can make by starting a shift in something really tiny. And that was the first edition of The Level Up, the solo series inside the Mind Game podcast focused on exploring the behind the scenes of habits. In this episode, we explored the subconscious nature of habits. We touched briefly on multitasking and task switching, which is likely a future Level Up episode in here. We scraped the surface of the transformative power of perspective and mindset, and continued to reflect on the concept of neuroplasticity and the remarkable ability of our brains to rewire and create new neural connections. Just think about how this episode may have already created new connections in your brain. And when you share this episode and what you found interesting with a friend, you can continue to light up not only your brain, but those around you. We explored the power of a growth mindset and considered the impact of setting our environment up to help us succeed. We, it turns out, are the voice that we hear most often, the voice that shapes how we think. So don't underestimate the power of the words that you say to yourself in shifting your perspective. And that was our Jedi mind trick, the simple switch of I have to I get to. The good news, you don't have to change major parts of your life to reach your goals. You can choose to start by shifting your focus to one small part of the day, to one habit. How do you do that? That's the question we will continue to explore in part 2 of Habits. Huge shout out to all of the people sharing their habit tips and strategies with us on social media. Stay tuned for a special mini episode sharing everyone's suggestions. And with that, here's my wonder. If 40 to 50% of our day is run by habits, the things that we don't even think about, just imagine the long-term impact of shifting one small, tiny, almost insignificant action. Just imagine, what difference could that make to your life? Thanks for listening. It's time for your Mind Game episode challenge. Share this episode and flip your perspective. Choose one thing and flip it from I have to I get to. Post your I have to I get to on social media and let us know how that flips your perspective. Hashtag it, level up your life. Thank you for choosing to listen to Mind Game, a podcast to level up your life. We hope that you've enjoyed the insights, inspiration, and habits shared in this episode. Your support is a game changer, and we are incredibly grateful to be on this journey with such an amazing community of listeners. If you have any wonders, questions, or suggestions about this or future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media and share your feedback. Remember, you can catch all of our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps us bring valuable content to you, our listeners. Don't want to miss the next episode? Join our Facebook group and email list and get ahead of the game. Until next time, remember to mind the game so that you can get out of your own way and level up your life.